What's going on, class and professor? If you're watching this, professor, uh, this is now YouTube video number 2 for this class, and uh, for this week, I will be trying my best to summarize what chapter 5 through 8 was. Now, as you can guess from the thumbnail, a lot of it was really how reading is important, and I'm actually really glad that I had this big college level textbook to tell me that I have to read. I Who would have known? Who would have known reading's important? Not me, you know. But really, this is I really had to think back on it, through my career in school on they obviously would teach you how to read when you're little, but they didn't really they wouldn't tell you how important. They would just tell you, they would just teach you it, just to teach you. But they, like for science, they would teach you how important math is, and knowing equations and stuff. But they don't really tell you how important reading is and how to analyze something really. Now for this class, mainly with chapter 5, they were talking about how success in law depends upon your ability to read accurately and with understanding. Now, I would think success in anything comes with reading accurately and with understanding, but I mean, you can't really get mad because with law, especially, it really does matter because it's all writing and reading. It really is. You know, back to the first view with syllogisms. If you want to build a strong major premise, which is the first part of the 3-part syllogism, you have to have content with that. All right. You know, you don't really you don't invent an argument. You discover one through through laws, through statutes, through constitutions, regulations, even journal articles. You know. Now, although I was pretty skeptical upon entering this with the whole reading thing, not because I can't read, but it's really we're being taught how to read. Like I already know how to do that, but I didn't know the different types of reading. Right, but upon reading the reading, I understood. I understood what they were because we've all done this before, but I didn't really know what they were. You didn't know what they officially were, and one of the different types is instrumental reading, which probably, as from what I saw, is the one you should probably avoid. It's instrumental reading is reading specifically legal text for. It's just reading anything, not just, but it's reading for a very specific purpose. It's looking for material to construct arguments to help your client or your opponent, right? You don't approach the text with an open mind. It's a closed mind. Your position is dictated by the alignment of your client. Right? You want to, you know, you want to find anything in the text that supports your client's position, right? I have it all here in my notes, right? Because obviously, well, I wasn't instrumentally reading. I was doing next one, which is active reading. Active reading is you're way more engaged, right? It's the opposite, really. If instrumental reading is with a closed mind, active reading is with an open mind. And I feel like the big takeaway of chapter 5 especially is if to be a good advocate or lawyer, you have to actively read, right? And the only downside from active reading I've seen is it just takes more time, right? Because you're not, you're searching through legal text to find like the one statute or the one regulation that's going to help you out. You're reading through the entire thing. You're reading through the entire statute. You're reading through the entire law, right? Because you may find something. If you're instrumentally reading, you find something that helps you out. Great, But 2 pages later, there's something that screws your position over. You don't want that. It's the one with the least risk involved, right? It's an exercise of what the book called super ego, which is, it's the rational mind. You have that voice of doubt in your head. It's like, maybe I should read on further. And I think that's really the best way to do it. I would not do instrumental reading. I would do it if, clock was ticking. Time was moving on. I was on the clock. I had to find something then and now. But any other time, you better be actively reading, right? Another part of the chapter that really stuck with me was the minor premise, right? Because the major premise is almost like, I think it's probably the simplest part of the syllogism. It establishes a rule, right? Like, free speech is protected by the First Amendment. Ownership of guns is protected by the Second, right? A car must have tires to be a car, right? Boats, a plane has to have wings to be a plane, right? It just establishes a basic rule, basic thing. It's it's almost like rule of nature. But the minor premise is, when you want to make one, I want to make a persuasive one. It's the same as the major premise, right? The advocate strives to create an impression of certainty, right? It's not wrong. If you disagree to it, then it's not because it's wrong. It's because you're like petty or something. You just don't trust me. You're mad that I won, right? A minor premise will always deal with facts, right? And thankfully, courts are bound to follow the law faithfully. Well, I mean, they should follow the law faithfully. But there's few times where the court obediently accepts something as a fact just because you said so. You gotta be persuasive. You don't have to be logical. Well, you do have to be logical and persuasive, but just because you're right doesn't mean you're persuasive. And that's the point of your minor premise, right? And what you really want to do with your minor premise, to create a strong impression of certainty, is ground it in evidence, right? I remember, well, obviously from the book, there's a good example, the basic syllogism. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal, right? Major premise, you can't whittle away at that. You can't chip at that. All men are mortal. It's been proven well over. But, Socrates is a man. How do you know that? Right? I mean, like, what evidence do we have? We have a couple of statues, a couple of basic thoughts from a couple thousand years ago. But, if this was like the modern day, let's say, and you want to ground that, you ground it in evidence, you ground it in fact. So, like, let's say, all men mortal, Socrates is a man. Then you add on to that affidavit of, like, his doctor, right? Affidavit of Dr. Plato. Socrates is a man, right? So, like, the doctor signs off that Socrates is a man. The doctor also says the same thing, which, you should always trust your doctor. But also, you want ground evidence, and something the book talked about was the different types of evidence you can get, right? And one part I was really interested by was how the book talked about with appellate courts, right? Because I learned a lot about appellate courts last semester in public law. But I didn't know for appellate courts, the only type of evidence you can use was the evidence gathered in the previous trial. I didn't know that. Because it's not a new trial, right? It's an appeal. You're trying to appeal a past decision saying, like, the court is wrong, right? Because if you're using new evidence, it's essentially a new trial. That's just a retrial. Like, that to be able to do that, you have to have, like, a mistrial and a retrial. I didn't know you have to have, or maybe I'm wrong, but that's why I took away from it. I was very interested by that. But, yeah, you want to gather evidence, and, I mean, you should gather all the evidence you can to support your claims, to support your minor premise, because from what I see, the minor premise is really like the meat of the sandwich, the meat of the syllogism sandwich, right? It's what's in there, right? Because the major premise will be a fact that is almost like indisputable, that everyone knows, right? Words on a piece of paper, obviously, and then the conclusion just rolls off the tongue, right? It's like, yeah, like a fifth grader could rule out what you were gonna say next, but the minor premise is like where it all connects. That's where you staple it, right? You need to have that be like airtight, bulletproof, and a big way to have your syllogism be very like, yeah, no, this is right, is you appeal to common sense, right? You want to use definite facts, right? And obviously your syllogism is going to be harder the more you got to explain it, and if it's like not common sense, right? Because you don't have to explain common sense. You don't have to explain the sky is blue. You don't have to explain snow is cold. It's just common sense. Everyone knows that, right? But with the facts you want to use to create certainty, there are two types of facts. There's brute facts and then there's compound facts. And almost always, for your minor premise and your syllogism, you want to use brute facts, all right? Like in class, when we talked about like a brute fact was, someone saying I have a headache, right? There's no reason to lie about that. It's like a physical truth, right? You don't need any more follow-up, like, I mean, like, you could, like, oh, let's get a CAT scan or something, but there's no need for that. It's a brute fact, sky is blue, or, fish swim. It's a brute fact that you don't need total proof of it. But the compound fact was, I saw Jenny cheating on Bobby at the McDonald's. What? Right? Those are things where it's like you need more information before you really know that's a fact, right? You need to compound on it, right? Because brute facts are facts about the physical world. Someone did or proceed. They are what the text says, first order reports concerning physical reality, whereas compound facts combine reports concerning the physical world. They combine reports concerning brute facts, and they make inferences based on those. And always, assertions or syllogisms made with brute facts are just going to be more persuasive than ones with compound facts. So you always want to use brute facts. Always try to get down there. Now you can always break down your compound facts into brute facts. It will take a lot more work, but it will definitely be worth it because now your argument is way more persuasive, and whoever is more persuasive wins. You could also, the boss in the courtroom is the judge. It's always going to be the judge and the jury. So, the same thing with legal terms, like a syllogism, like with compound facts in your syllogism, in your minor premise, you have to break it down. The same thing is with key legal terms. Any legal term, it's not self-explanatory. You have to elaborate. You are explaining to the people in charge why you are right. Assume they know nothing, right? You always have to elaborate for the judge, explain legal terms, and ground your premises. That's what I took away from this chapter. Knowing about minor premises. Elaborate for the judge, explain legal terms, and ground your premises. All right. Yeah, this chapter really made me learn a lot more about syllogisms. I learned, I really thought it was all like equal, with the major premise, the minor premise, and the conclusion. But now it's really like you gotta hammer home your minor premise, because if you fumble the minor premise, then we may as well not have a syllogism. You look stupid, right? Anyway, I hope all of you found this very informative. I definitely did. Our subscriber goal is through the roof. We were going for 1, now we're at 5. We, 5 times smashed that. I'm very proud. Thank you, everyone. And, let's shoot for 10. Thank you.